Ming is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, which is a legal aid organization that advances the civil rights of incarcerated and institutionalized people through legal representation and advocacy. Ms. Ye has litigated dozens of individual and class action cases challenging unconstitutional conditions for prisoners and detainees, tried several jury cases to verdict, and argued successfully before the Supreme Court and the U.S. appeals for the Third Circuit. She also was an adjunct professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where she co-taught the civil practice clinic for 5 years. I am excited to have Ming with us today. Welcome back home to Heart City. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
So, Sue, we had an amazing time. We talked about a very creative documentary that was put out by your organization in reference to this crisis that's happening with our incarcerated family. Where are we now? I know we've put that out and you've been advocating amongst other organizations to try and get some change in the space. Vaccines are now all the rage for all of us. We're watching Moderna and AstraZeneca and others present themselves and their vaccines to bear. What's happening as it relates to vaccines for those who are incarcerated?
So the first thing I want to say is many things actually have not changed, unfortunately, for people who are incarcerated. Many prisons are still dealing with access to proper medical care, access to having tests done regularly, regular universal testing for incarcerated people and staff. Those are vital tools for fighting coronavirus in prisons. What is newly developed is the possibility of vaccines. What is incredibly important is that both incarcerated people and prison staff are both vaccinated, not just a priority to people who work in the prisons. That's important, of course. We know that that might be one vector where the coronavirus is entering the prisons, but the medical experts and the public health experts all agree that incarcerated people should be vaccinated just at the same time, in the same wave, if you will, with the prison staff. So that is really important. But I want to emphasize many things have not yet changed. People are still in severe lockdowns.
Wow.
We had a recent, I guess you could call it positive development in the Philadelphia prisons. But right now, even with that development, that means instead of 15 minutes out of their cell, they now are entitled to 45 minutes out of their cell. That means 23 plus hours. People are confined in a small space, the size of a small bathroom, for 23 plus hours a day.
Wow. I can't even, I'll just be honest. I can't even stay, in my bedroom for more than a couple hours, or living room or den for more than a couple hours. And you're talking about something the size of a bathroom being there for 23 hours. What does that do to an individual? I'm sure there's a level of significant trauma that one experiences, essentially being caged in a bathroom size space for literally the full day.
Absolutely. So for the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project for decades has been fighting for humane conditions for people who are incarcerated. Solitary confinement, we know, has a devastating effect on people's mental and physical health. Mm-hmm. On top of that, many people who are incarcerated already suffer from mental illness and serious mental illness. So solitary confinement and these intense lockdown conditions just exacerbate it. So unfortunately, there was a suicide in the Philadelphia prisons about a month ago. And the reports we received through our hotline was that that person struggled with being in such a small space for hours and hours upon time, for months. We were talking about since the pandemic started back in March, prisons have been using this method of trying to deal with coronavirus. Our position is you can do that in ways that are more humane.
What are some of those ways? I mean, it's one thing to say, look, we've got to get them out of these spaces into a different environment. Has your organization and others thought about what some of those solutions are? And if so, how do we advocate, especially for those who have family members who are incarcerated? How do we advocate for better quality of life?
Yeah, first thing is regular and ongoing testing of both incarcerated people and staff. You identify the problem, address it, stop the spread.
Okay.
Two, you can use the core cohorts. So you are going to release people in certain groups. You still have to use social distancing, but you can do it in ways that you use cohorts of smaller groups, but large enough where you can still release people out in a safe manner. And then, of course, another piece, which is if you can't do that, then you may need to look at how can you reduce the population of your prison so that you have enough space in order to ensure humane conditions.
You know, it's interesting. I think about Senate Bill 942, which talks about lifers who have been in place and have now surpassed a certain amount of years, 55, 65, where the levels of cases of recidivism, have gone down. I mean, you're addressing the issue where an individual is so less likely to create more additional crime that it's better for us to release them than to keep them in the space and allocate, whether it be Medicaid or some of these other resources, and just keeping and housing them alone. Is that something that the public should be fighting for as we talk about, the ongoing legislative season? What are some of the things that we as community members also need to demand from state reps and state senators to ensure, that our state is looking at this in a really proactive way?
So the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project focuses on providing civil legal aid.
Okay.
But overall, I think the public should stay well informed on what criminal justice reforms there are. There are many of our colleagues who are working on these issues along with us. I encourage every person to educate themselves on each bill. As an organization, our focus has been on the civil end, which of course is affected by what happens in the criminal justice system.
So if you can, really quickly, for those who may not understand that difference, can you talk about the difference of, the civil focus of the organization versus others who are advocating and lobbying and legislation?
Sure. So our focus is the civil and constitutional rights of people who are incarcerated. But what that means is you are entitled, if you're incarcerated, to have safety from violence, have access to medical care, live in safe, sanitary, and humane conditions, and have access to basic necessary services. You should be allowed to practice your religion. You should have access to your lawyer. You should be able to have access to recreation and even outdoor exercise. These are all critical. On top of which, it's really important for us as a society, for people who are incarcerated, to have contact with their loved ones, their friends and families on the outside. That, of course, is going to help people when they re-enter society to have that connection with the community and to have been treated humanely so that they can rehabilitate and then come back and be full people of our society again.
So is there an increased cost in providing visitation? Some will argue, well, it's bad enough that they have to deal with correctional officers who are coming in and out and battling touch there as it relates to COVID and instances. But now bringing in family,
right?
Potentially there may be an issue. Or is it a challenge at all?
At the very beginning, one common thread and sort of devastating stories to hear was how people lost contact with families because visits were cut off. Many prisons did try to institute different types of visitation, whether it be phone calls or give people free phone calls or video visitation. So those are all efforts that are incredibly important. Now, hopefully, after COVID, they will supplement visits and they will still allow people to come visit in person. There's nothing better than seeing your loved one in person. We all know that.
Absolutely.
But during COVID, we have to do what we have to do. Video visits are very important, and high quality video visits that don't cut off
right.
are even better. And that's how they should be done. And having free access to phone calls. Some people do use email to communicate with family. But those are ways that we think are important alternatives to the in-person visit.
Sue, what is it that you want to tell the broadcast audience? For the ones who are listening now, they may not have someone who's incarcerated. Although we all know potentially a family who may be impacted by an incarcerated family member. But for those who are listening to the situation, they understand the severity of it. What do you need us to know? What is it that we need to take home out of this conversation today and go into a plan of action with?
First, educate yourself. We hope you'll follow us on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Watch our film that we made that features the voices of incarcerated people. They poignantly talk about the struggles they've had while they're living in prison with COVID-19. And then take action, whether that is contacting the prison administrators, contacting your elected officials, and also support the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project. The cold reality is that we also appreciate financial donations. That's how we were able to file a lawsuit. That all costs money. But those are all different things you can do. Some of it's very low effort, and some of it is just incredibly important.
So PAILP is a C3?
Yes, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The website is www.pailp.org.
As you look at the current landscape, obviously there's a new administration, new opportunities to bring certain things to light at a state and federal level. What do you see as you vision cast for the organization as the priority points for this year in 2021?
We hope the new administration will bring about needed criminal justice reform, whether that is through prison reform, making sure that people who are incarcerated are treated humanely on all levels, regardless of what crime they may have committed, where they are located. That is what we are asking for. Overall, comprehensive criminal justice reform is really necessary to address the issue of mass incarceration, which, as I'm sure you well know, affects Latinx people at a far greater rate than others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sue, you are amazing.
Thank you so much for talking about this issue.
No, it's really important. I appreciate your leadership on this and the good folk over at PAILP. As you know, this is family for you. So consider this home. However, we can continue to support you and the great work that the organization is doing. We will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.